Right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the December 6th edition of the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party. I think we missed our meeting in November, so it's some weeks since we last met. I welcome everybody, in particular those who are joining us online to listen to this morning's proceedings. So Matthew, if I can go to you and start with agenda item 1, apologies for absence.
Yeah, we have apologies from Councillor Jeremy Richard. I believe Councillor Wendy Fredericks is substituting. And I believe we also potentially have apologies from Councillor Nigel Pearce. And I haven't heard from Clive Stockton, but I think that may also be the case for him as well. Okay,
thank you for that. To item 2, public questions. Now, members will have had circulated, I think last week, an email from the B1346 awareness group, who would have attended, but instead circulated an email. I'm proposing to defer that to item 8 when we deal with the site allocations, and I think Mark, as the planning policy manager, will probably have something to say in response to that. So we'll deal with it in that manner, if I may. So to item 3, minutes of the meeting of the 11th of October, if we can check these for accuracy. If I just go through them page by page, page 1, page 2, page 3, 4, 5, and finally page 6. Does anyone have any corrections or comments regarding the minutes? If not, can I please have a proposer? Pauline Grove-Jones proposing, and a seconder, Councillor Heinrich. Thank you very much. I will sign those in due course. So we move to item 4. Items of urgent business. I don't believe we have any, Matt. Is that correct?
No, none received.
Item 5, declarations of interest. Do any members have any pecuniary or other interest to declare in accordance with the guidance in the agenda papers? I see no hands. Thank you very much. Item 6, update on matters from previous meetings. I don't certainly have any. I don't believe there are any others, are there, Matt, that we're aware of? No.
Not that I've been made aware of. I see Mark is shaking his head as well.
Yep. Okie doke. 7, any other business at the discretion of the chairman, as previously determined under item 4, none. So we move to the first of 3 items. Are we happy, Mark, to take the items on the agenda in the order as printed?
Yeah, I think we can do. The only other potential option, which might be more prudent, is to look at the North Walsham information first and then look at the site allocation policies second, because there is a relationship between those 2 items. So sequentially, it might be better to look at North Walsham. There might be quite a bit of discussion about North Walsham, I think, and probably less discussion about the site allocations. And your decision on the North Walsham site generally might inform the discussion on the site allocations policies, which come later. So perhaps if I reverse those 2 items round the other way, take the North Walsham item first, then the site allocations policies, and then finally the consultation arrangements. I mean, in a way, all 3 are related to each other. So before I start on each individual item, I just thought I'd just place them in the sort of context, really. So probably not escape your notice that these 3 items, if we make decisions today, will result in the local plan being published for consultation, what's called the Regulation 19 consultation. I thought it'd be worthwhile just saying a little bit about that and the significance of that stage and where we're going, really, because that might inform your later discussions. So the Regulation 19 consultation is a consultation on the plan that you believe is sound and capable of being examined. So it should be the plan that, all things being equal, we submit to the inspector, and the inspector will examine it, and subject to the outcome of that examination, we would then adopt. So we're getting to the point where what's in the plan is basically almost our final say. And I'll say a little bit more about whether it's our final say or not in a minute. So the consultation provides the opportunity for those who want to make comments directly to the inspector. So unlike the last round of public consultation where people were expressing their concerns to us, and we published lots of different options and lots of background material to inform discussion, the stage we're now at is asking people, what do you think of this plan? And they submit their comments directly to the inspector, and the inspector considers whether the plan is sound or legally compliant or otherwise. Now, before we get to that stage, there is the opportunity for the council to look at the representations that have been made and modify its plan. And you can do three things. You could withdraw your plan entirely from the process. You could say, actually, we were wrong to put this out to consultation. There's something seriously wrong with it. We better not proceed to examination. We better withdraw the plan completely and have another think. I'd be extremely surprised and disappointed if that's what happens here. I don't think we're in that position, but that's the sort of doomsday scenario that somebody makes a representation that we agree with that basically says the plan's legally unsound in some way, we better not progress, and we stop the process, go back 2 or 3 stages and start again. The next scenario is that the council can make what are called main modifications. So we look at the representations that are received. We think they can be addressed by modifying the plan. We modify the plan and we consult on it again. So essentially we incorporate modifications into the document and we do a further round of public consultation. And then the inspector sits down and considers the modified plan through the examination process. That's still possible as a route that we may end up going down. It will depend on the representations that are received and what we think of them. And the third light touch approach is something called minor modifications, where the council basically schedules a list of minor changes, and they're very minor changes, and invites the inspector to incorporate those minor changes through the examination process. And obviously I'd hope we're in that third category, that anything which is said at this stage is relatively minor and we'll be able to adjust the content of the plan through tabling a schedule of minor modifications. So that really underscores the importance of this stage. You're getting to the point now where we've done all of the thinking, we've written the plan, we're content with the plan. And if we were sitting down tomorrow at the examination sessions, we'd be prepared to defend what we've come up with on the basis that it's, you know, a good plan for the district and meets all the legal requirements. And I think you have done that over the last year or so, reviewing where we were, modifying the plan. I think it's a very strong sort of package overall. I mean, clearly there are risks attached to it. Not everybody's going to agree, but I'm broadly content we've got a pretty good plan that's suitable for submission and examination. So that's where we are in the process. I'm now going to turn to North Walsham. I'm not going to present huge amounts of detail here because I think you might find it more helpful to ask me questions about where we are and what we're doing rather than me present, you know, the entirety of the report. So obviously North Walsham's critical to the success of the plan. It's got a large chunk of the growth that North Norfolk requires on a single site on the North Walsham West proposals. It is inherent. It's the key to the success of the plan to demonstrate that the proposal can deliver, you know, high quality, sustainable development. There are, in my mind, next to no sensible alternatives. I think, you know, if you look at the range of options that we've considered, the growth that's being put elsewhere in all of the other sort of growth settlements, our approach to rural development and growth in the villages, if we're to have any chance of meeting the housing target, which is quite difficult in North Norfolk, it's quite an ambitious target, then delivery of the North Walsham proposal is absolutely key. And obviously there'll be a huge amount of focus on it through the examination. About 18 months ago, I think I gave you some advice that basically said we ought to be in a position here where we don't repeat the errors we made at Fakenham. We don't allocate large chunks of land and then hope it'll all be all right. We should do a lot of front loading of the process and do a lot of site investigation work and public consultation, and preferably prepare a development brief for this site before we allocate it in a local plan. Now, I'm not going to hide away from the fact that's not happened. You know, there's been various things which have meant we've not been able to proceed as fast as we would like to have done on that work. So I am putting a proposition in front of you where we proceed to the next round of public consultation without a development brief being in place. And that means that the policy for North Walsham is the key controlling mechanism around what we're going to get in the future. It's really important that you're all comfortable with what the policy says and think it's got sufficient sort of controls and caveats attached to it that we can deliver good quality development that the community hopefully will support. So that's the first thing. We don't have a development brief for the site. I would like to have been in a position where we did have a development brief, but we're not there. And I don't think we have the luxury of delaying submission of the plan, probably several months. For other reasons, I think we do need to progress and get the plan submitted and in front of an inspector. Now, the position at North Walsham West is, I think, nevertheless, pretty well advanced. I think the community consultation events that we did earlier on in the year quite well received in terms of process and giving people the opportunity to comment. You'll see we had a lot of representations which are tabled in the report, and we've drafted some sort of summary responses there saying how we intend to proceed from this point forwards. And I'm going to say I don't think there are any major showstoppers left to be resolved, save two issues which I think are still concerning. The first is the necessity or otherwise for new rail bridges over the railway line at Bradfield Road to get back into the industrial estate. You'll see in the papers there is still 3 or 4 options being considered for that. At one end of the scale, it's a very modest interventions in relation to the existing road bridge that goes over the railway line, traffic light control junctions at either end, and some pedestrian safety sort of measures so that you can get over that bridge safely. At the other end of the scale is the possibility of an entirely new road bridge over the railway line, probably on a different alignment to the existing bridge, meeting modern specification. I think at this stage the council should keep both options on the table and shouldn't preclude either. I think that would be the sensible thing to do, because I think irrespective of whether modest interventions are acceptable in relation to this development proposal, we should be thinking about growth in North Walsham in 20, 30 or 40 years' time, when a new rail bridge over this railway line will release potentially further development potential long after I'm gone. But a future planning officer thinking, who in their right mind didn't reserve adequate room on this site to put a proper bridge over this railway line so we could access that development land in behind the industrial estate. So I think it's important that we do keep both options open. It's highly likely that the modest intervention route, i.e. keeping the existing bridge, traffic light signals, pedestrian safety, will prove to be an acceptable solution for this current development proposal. So I don't think we're likely to be sat in this position in 6 or 8 months' time, where the whole of this development requires a brand new rail bridge over the railway line. I think we've got sufficient information now to suggest that that lower intervention sort of route is more likely. But that's still, nevertheless, an area that ideally I'd like to sit here and tell you what the solution is. And all I can tell you is there are 2 or 3 solutions, and we should keep all of them open and not narrow those options down too much. The other area which I think requires further work is off-site highways, and I'm going to look at Nigel Dixon here because this is his favourite. It's clearly going to be the case if we build large amounts of housing and other development in North Walsham, that the highway network going back into Norwich and particularly through Coltishall is going to have additional traffic on it, and that additional traffic could be relatively significant. And anybody that knows Coltishall and drives through there regularly will know that the highway network is very constrained, particularly the bridge over the river, and the scope for large-scale improvements is, to my mind, extremely modest. So we are going to have to do some more detailed work. I say we, I think the developers will have to step in and do some more detailed work, traffic impact assessment work around the impacts at Coltishall, to make sure that we manage off-site traffic. And there are probably 2 or 3 things in my mind that are important here. At the moment, it's been extremely difficult to model traffic impact because of COVID restrictions and the fact that there's not very much traffic on the network, and it would be wrong to measure what's going on today and say that's indicative of what's likely to happen in the future. A lot of modelling, certainly the early modelling that we've done, is based on 2011 census data, which is very, very old now. So we certainly need to produce more updated information. And the third thing, which I think is largely sort of unknown, but it'd be interesting to do a bit more work on it, is the extent to which home working might become embedded in the future. Because clearly a lot of traffic that's going up and down the road to Norwich is commuter traffic for work, and also for retail and other purposes. And those things, I think, are undergoing quite sort of structural shifts and changes that we ought to be taking into account. And the North Walsham proposals, when they come to fruition, we're talking about development that probably won't be finished until 2040. So this is not a development that's going to appear out of the ground tomorrow. So long-term sort of modelling about how this development might impact is going to be pretty important, and the policy reflects the need to do that additional work. The other thing that's going to be key is to what extent we can produce a development proposal which encourages, I'll use the word self-containment, so it keeps people where they are and discourages people going somewhere else. So the mixed use credentials of that allocation, the fact that it's got employment on it, localised shopping facilities, and public transport, walking and cycling, encouraging people to stay in North Walsham rather than go elsewhere, is an effective way of mitigating the impacts. So we need to think that through carefully. So all of what I've said there is reflected in the policy, which we might have a little detailed talk about when I present the second item, which requires approval of development briefs, traffic impact assessments, green infrastructure strategies, and all sorts of other things that must happen before development can proceed on the site. The key for me is for us to collectively feel that we've done enough, that we've got a deliverable proposition, that we've answered all the key questions around the ability of the site to deliver what we all want it to deliver in terms of the mix of uses, the supporting facilities, high quality design and all the other things. And I think the work that we've done on the emerging development brief and developing the policy, and in particular the vision for the development overall, puts us in a very good position, and actually in quite a different position to where we were when we were looking at same scale of development in Fakenham 10 years ago, when actually all we did was put a red line around a bit of land and develop here, and we delayed all the decisions about what that development might look like until after the site had been allocated. Whereas I think here I'm going to say that we're in a very different position. There's been a lot of thinking and there's been a lot of consultation which will inform the end result. So that's a long-winded way of me saying I'm broadly comfortable that we proceed to the next round of plan making and that we've answered all the key questions that we need to. I'm not going to read through the committee report. You've got a summary of the representations there and an indication of what we'll do with them. The recommendation is basically asking you to note those and give me authority to crack on and produce the development brief for the site. You'll be aware we put a bid in under the Communities Fund for doing that work, which was unsuccessful. So we will need to think about how we're going to fund that work and bring it forward. I would hope and like to think that we'll have further progress on that, and certainly something that's available for when the plan is actually examined, which on my timetable probably looks sometime after September next year. By the time we go through the rounds of public consultation, submit the plan, get an inspector, and we actually sat down at the examination sessions, I think it'll be in the autumn of next year and probably not before then. So we've certainly got a bit more time to make some further progress. So I think I'm going to be quiet and ask if there are any general sort of questions. Sure there will be.
Okay, thank you, Mark, for that. So I'll throw this open to the floor.
I think we've got Virginia, John Toy and Paul Heinrich.
Yep. Virginia, do you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Chairman. Mark, I'm just going to begin by saying what I think you would expect me to say, which is that I'm sorry that this development brief hasn't been prepared before the Regulation 19 process, because North Walsham councillors were under the understanding that it would be. So that is a disappointment. There are 2 or 3 things I want to raise, but in the light of what I've just said, at the top of page 40, you've written here, prior approval of a development brief before any development can proceed on the site is a policy requirement of the draft plan. Now, what I want to know is what can proceed means. What is the understanding of proceed? Does that mean laying foundations? Does it mean submitting a planning application? What does it mean?
It means no development, Virginia. So this is a staged process, and the council would be quite legitimate in turning away a planning application that was submitted before a development brief had been approved. It's a specific policy requirement for that reason, so that there's a sequence to decisions which have to be made. And that first decision is approval of a development brief, followed by a decision on a planning application, not the other way round.
Okay, so it's not about building, it is about the very beginning of the process.
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I wanted to say about the Bradfield Road Bridge.
Yeah.
My concern would be that if the bridge isn't adequate, HGVs won't use it. They will simply carry on in a normal way. And that's, I realise that's just a personal observation on my part, but it's just one I would like to lay down. If the infrastructure isn't adequate, it won't be used, and then it will fail in its objective. So, you know, that is something I think it's reasonable to say. I'm also concerned about the traffic impacts on the rest of the town, not just Cotteshall. So I am assuming that in future studies, that will be a major part of the work.
Yeah, so all development of any particular scale will require detailed traffic impact assessment. So I think it's above 100 dwellings, there's a threshold, and that's a standardised requirement. You'll see in the policy wording here, there's an awful lot about traffic, Virginia, about what needs to be done. And that all adds up to a comprehensive assessment of all of the on and off site impacts associated with this proposal. So, you know, complicated modelling of all the junctions, where's everybody going to, at what time of day, how will this impact on this street, on that junction, in expectation that the developer has to address the entirety of any adverse consequences of their proposal. Now, when I say the entirety, There's often a debate about how significant the increase in traffic will be and how bad its effects will be. And the Highway Authority is obviously the arbiter there, the referee, if you like, as to whether this particular bit of road or that particular road will operate in an acceptable way. And I don't think it would be unreasonable to say I often see a bit of disappointment amongst members when the Highway Authority turns around and says, well, this is perfectly all right, even though the local evidence suggests that the network doesn't operate in an acceptable way. And it gets back to this interpretation of what is a significant impact and what's the expectation around how the network will work. So let's just cut to the chase. It's perfectly acceptable in some circumstances for there to be queuing traffic in a road. You know, it's not unusual for roads to have queuing traffic in them. That's not necessarily unsafe, and it's not necessarily sufficiently inconvenient to muster up a highway objection. So I'm just sort of saying that, you know, the public expectation and the reality of the position, there's sometimes a mismatch between those two things. But you can be assured that there will need to be very, very comprehensive consideration of the on and off site access issues here before development can proceed.
And Mark, finally, are you going to move on to the comments or I
wasn't going to run through them all, Virginia, because I think that the basic point that I would make is all of those comments. If you read them, I'm quite heartened by lots of them in a way. Yeah. Lots of comments which are made about, you know, energy efficiency, about encouraging walking, about providing for health, and actually the consultation materials that we published said we were going to do all of those things, and our policies now say we are going to do all of those things. So I felt in large part what was said we were already addressing, you know, and we can be comfortable in that because we've got a comprehensive set of policies. One thing I was going to modify, remind me now, is I think it would be very useful if the policy wording, and we're sort of slipping between two reports here, if the policy wording expressly referred to compliance with the vision. Yes. You remember that we spent a little bit of time at previous meetings going through that vision and trying to come up with some wording that, you know, articulated our combined sort of aspirations for the site. And I think the result was quite a good, tightly drafted vision, which I think the town council were broadly content with, we were content with. But the policy at the moment doesn't specifically mention that vision. So I think it would be very useful if it did, if we added that in, because that's the anchor for everything else, which then sort of follows.
Thank you. In that case, I'd just like to add one more thing before I am quiet. I'd like to say something about the green infrastructure and open space area. I also find that very heartening. I just wanted to say I was involved in the earlier local plan, the last one. At that time, there were plenty of councillors who were interested in green issues, in biodiversity, and there were plenty of members of the public who were also, but we were not the majority. And I now feel that that has shifted. And I'd also like to thank officers for the attention to this particular issue, because I think there has been a change in the climate of opinion, and that's very welcome.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I mean, the policy wording, again, it doesn't just say you must produce a green infrastructure strategy. It goes on and articulates what that should look like in terms of quantity and types of spaces, which I think is a shift forward. It gives the developer and the public, you know, tells them what our expectations are very, very clearly. As I say, rather than just saying, let's have 5 hectares of open space, it goes further and actually starts to paint the picture of what that open space might look like and how it might function and where it might be on the site, and has responded, I think, positively to the comments which were received. You know, you'll note there's a specific reference to a northwest corridor, whatever it is, which is, you know, reference to that having a green buffer between the existing built area and the new allocation. We've responded to the battlefield location. You know, so I think that's a positive aspect of what we're doing.
Okay, is is that satisfactory, Virginia, for the issues that you've raised? Are you?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you. I'll move to Councillor Paul Heinrich. I think is the next.
I think it was John actually had his hand up first.
So sorry, to Councillor John Toy.
All right, thank you, Paul. I didn't mind who went; it doesn't matter. But thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a few comments. Interesting that we're talking about building a load of houses, and the real question is around about transport and infrastructure. But I guess it always is. I know we've said that there needs to be a transport brief. My concern is that often that we look at this, we put electric vehicle charging points on houses because we assume people are going to go in cars. There is a new consultation come out for Transport East. I've not yet had a chance to review that. And I'm concerned that what we need to be doing is having other forms of travel that is viable for people to use, so people aren't getting in their cars, so they're travelling to Norwich by the trains, which is why North Walsham is well connected. Better buses around the town, so that we're not moving these cars around, electric or otherwise. Let's just not have those movements. There needs to be alternatives. So whilst maybe, I don't think we need to change the wording, but when those studies are done, as we do for the larger developments, that finding alternative forms of transport really must be a given with the green infrastructure, everything we're doing. HGVs, well, again, let's have a look, see what they're talking about on the transport, the Transport East consultation, because they are talking about things that they've been talking about for years, but improving rail links where we may be able to move things by rail better. So because it's a long thing, as you said, 2040 before we get in there, there is an opportunity in this to make sure that we look at the transport and infrastructure in a new way and not assume it's a growth of the old way. So I just wanted to make that comment and make people aware there's this Transport East consultation, which I'll get shared around so people can comment, and we'll look whether we need to comment as a council as well. But so thank you. I just wanted to sort of add that into the mix. Thank you.
Do you wish to respond to that, Mark, before we
I'll just make a general point. So the transport impact assessment will scope out the impacts of the development, but that's really just the starting point. So you would see on a scheme like this detailed travel planning, which is all about that point about modal shift, horrible bit of technology, terminology that, but getting people out of their cars, getting them on their bikes, getting them walking. You'll see in the policy there's reference to walkable streets, which is exactly that point that everybody should have access to key services in convenient walking distance, so they don't have to pull their car off the drive at all. I'm sure there's going to be continuing debate in North Walsham around, public transport hubs. There's an ongoing debate about buses, bus links and so on. The scheme will have to be, comprehensively served by public transport. That's an absolute given. So I'm sure, John, that all of those issues that you're referring to, which is all goes to that point I made about keeping people where they are and providing the services locally so they don't have to get in their cars and go somewhere else. And I actually think there's a wider opportunity in North Walsham to improve the lot of everybody, existing and new. This scale of growth will bring new investment. It will bring new retail opportunities. It will bring new job opportunities, all of which will help people stay in the town and help it sort of thrive in the future. I think we could be quite positive and quite excited about the potential beneficial impacts of the development and not focus too much on the negative impacts. But it will require us to do the job properly and plan it properly over a long period of time, so we don't just end up with a suburb bolted on the side of the town. That is not what we're trying to do here at all.
Yep, fine. If I can move to Councillor Heinrich, I think you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. You've already covered a lot of what I was going to ask, and it is an excellent policy. It has covered everything that I've been concerned about from very early on, and certainly the Town Council's been concerned about. It's unfortunate we haven't got the development brief yet, although we've obviously roughed out where it's going. Is there any timescale for that? And presumably with the site promoters now appearing, they will be involved with that.
Yeah. So the Communities Fund bid, Paul, based on the notion that the district council was going to have to do a huge amount of the sort of technical appraisal work itself in the absence of a site promoter. So if you saw the bid that we put in, it had archaeology appraisal, it had drainage, it had green infrastructure, you know, it had a whole suite of documents that would need to be produced, including a development brief and a design code for the site. Now we have a site promoter. The traditional route would be they would focus on the technical work, so traffic impact assessment, drainage strategies, those sort of things, which are largely technical. And we would focus on the development brief and the design code and progress with that. And the technical work would feed into the, you know, development brief and the design code where they are related to each other. So I currently think we're likely to commission external support pared back, just focused on the development brief and the design code as a bespoke piece of work. And that feels like it's, you know, 6 months, not 6 years. It feels like it's, you know, it's manageable within 6 or 8 months, that sort of timetable. To be honest, our focus at the moment is getting the plan out of the door after Christmas. So, you know, actually commissioning that work, scoping it. We have written a draft commissioning document, which can be shared probably at the next working party, which says this is what this document needs to, you know, include and how we're going to go about it. So I would like to be in a position to commission early in the new year and have something, you know, a reasonable period of time after that. As I say, it's going to come back and haunt me. I'd like that work to be there for the examiner to sit down and see it. That would be, you know, and for it to have already been subject to consultation before we get to that point. I think you probably are all aware that Stuart Harrison's left the authority now. You know, he was the lead officer on North Walsham. He's taken a lot of expertise and resource out of the door with him. We're going to have to recruit somebody else into the team. You know, I think he did a fantastic job at the community liaison stuff. You know, he worked hard with the town council and the site promoters and others, and reputationally put us in a very good position. You know, very transparent, very open. Hopefully we'll be able to proceed on that basis, but no doubt, you know, the loss of him as an individual is going to have an impact, you know, and we'll just have to see what sort of replacements we can get.
Okay, thank you for that. It gives me some slight concern regarding the road, because obviously developers will be involved at that stage of planning. We know they're loath to put vast sums of money into road building other than their own estate roads. I've always taken the line that without the road, the development can't succeed. And without the road going to the industrial estate, we don't open up that land for economic development, which is critical in keeping people in the town and providing the employment, particularly for our younger residents. Do you see any issues around that, or are we able to continue with that approach that the road goes first?
Well, I think there are two things, Paul. There's the technical delivery of it, you know, alignment, technical specification, land availability, drainage, all those other things. I'm comfortable that on those grounds we have a deliverable proposition. We've not identified anything to date which would physically prevent that road going through from one end to the other. The big elephant in the room is the funding mechanism, and it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. You know, the funding pots that are available, infrastructure funding from government, from Homes England or whatever, tend to go to shovel-ready schemes which have got planning permission. They don't go to schemes which are being talked about at local plan preparation stage that have not yet been subject to examination. Now, we've spoken to people, and this scheme has got, you know, all of the credentials that you would hope and expect to be a good candidate for public funding should it be required. But, you know, I can't sit here today and say to you, we've got a commitment, you know, from somebody else, from Homes England or from government to, you know, £8 or £10 million worth of funding. We're not in that position. But that's not untypical at this stage of the plan making process. You know, it's not, if you looked at all local plans up and down the country, you will find these sort of issues are pretty sort of routine, and they get resolved, you know, through the next sort of stages in the process. Had we had a technical issue, you know, this road needs to cross a county wildlife site full of newts or something, or the ground conditions are not suitable, or there's an ownership constraint and you can't possibly get this line through here, then the plan is not deliverable and we shouldn't be pursuing it. But I'm not, you know, not too concerned about the funding thing, because I think ultimately that will be resolved.
Okay, thank you. Couple more points. The sustainability issues and design and layout, that's going to be covered in the brief, isn't it?
Yes.
That's good. Okay. The other issue, which is certainly a local concern in the town, is that the level of affordable housing that will be in there. Are we able to put anything in at this stage, or will that come later?
Right. So 15% is what is currently said to be viable. The viability assessment comes to a figure of 15%. We are reviewing the viability assessment, and I've specifically asked the consultants to come up with an individual figure for North Walsham, in the hope and expectation it might be higher than 15%. Because, you know, if it's large chunk of the development in the district, we obviously want to get as much affordable housing out of it as we possibly can. I suspect, Paul, we're in a position where 15% is going to be about it. That's the number.
That's good, because of having loitered around the consultation for the other one the developers had for the Norwich Road site. They're very aware of even going near 15% from what was being said to residents who were making that inquiry. So I'd want to see at least 15%, and ideally we need more, given the very low pay in the area. But we'll do the best we can in the end. And so I'm happy to see that as the bare minimum at the moment. Okay. I think that covered everything I wanted on this one, and I just said, you know, congratulations on taking on board everything that's been thrown at you from members, town council, the public. Yeah, it's a superb response. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Victoria Holiday.
I think we had Councillor Dixon first. Apologies.
Did we? Sorry, I apologise. Councillor Dixon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say a few points regarding the approach, really. But before I do, I share the comments regarding the lack of a development brief at this stage, but we have to be pragmatic about this, I think, and I think we recognise the reasons why we are where we are, and we can't hold back the overall plan just for that. But that's my position on that. Can I just turn to the general approach then between, and I think you've drawn a very valid comparison between what we did back in 2007-8 regarding Fakenham and this development, because I think undoubtedly there were lessons that needed to be learnt from that allocation at Fakenham, the fact that we still haven't yet delivered that. And so deliverability in any allocation that we make has to be a key component in making those kind of decisions. So I welcome the additional work in terms of what you're going to do to ensure that this is a deliverable project and that it is deliverable in the kind of timescale that you anticipate. So I think the policy framework that you've got there should stand us in far better stead than we did regarding Fakenham. As far as the challenges around transport is concerned, and undoubtedly that B1150 is a challenging situation through both Coldershall and Horsted. And as you rightly say, there is no easy solution that will come forward that will, I think, satisfy the majority of people. But I come back to, I suppose, the challenge that there is within the modal shift that you mentioned. If it were in our gift to, or within Highways' gift, to come up with a really good solution that would satisfy Coltishall and Horsted, then I think that what we end up doing is trading the prospects of modal shift. Because the more you make it easy for people to keep in the mode that they currently have and the choices they currently have, the harder it is to get them to consider and to move to other forms. And undoubtedly, North Walsham is well served. It's on the rail line. It's got a reasonable bus route, and it's also got the prospects of being a more sustainable town than it currently is. And I think that overall sustainability is undoubtedly what we have to focus on in the long term. Why do people have to travel to Norwich in the volume that they currently do? So I think we have to be proactive and positive in promoting those objectives alongside what we would see as material development of houses and roads and access to industrial sites. There's more to this than just that. It is about changing some cultures here around what people currently do and what we would expect them to do in the future, and whether they like it or not. So I think that this approach is entirely right. I think we have learned those lessons, some of those lessons. And the big challenge always for a planning authority is you can allocate as much as you like, but you can't ensure delivery. And if we fail to deliver, then the plan, it fails in itself. So I think that the more we can do to facilitate that delivery and make sure that all the things that are in place that some people would put as obstructions and delays for the project, the better it is. So I'm very pleased at the approach that you have taken, and I'm very supportive of that, notwithstanding the fact that, you know, there are some huge challenges there, and it will not be an easy thing, and there will be lots of people who will say this won't work. But I think we have to make it work, and we can do that. So well done from me, which is perhaps unusual, Mark. I usually have a few more, but take that as a compliment. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Victoria, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, this is a wonderful piece of work, and all thanks to Stuart, who I totally agree will be a great loss. About health, I would like huge reassurance that, in fact, these dialogues with the CCG are constructive, and that actually the healthcare provision will be well in place before as the buildings are actually erected, because I don't think that's always the case. Experience in Elsham and other market towns is that usually there's a certain lag, and the healthcare system is under such pressure. I think you just can't possibly let that happen. Yeah.
So it's a major area of concern and quite challenging for the planning authority in a way. So the way it works is we have an agreed sort of protocol arrangement with the health authority. So there's a sort of dialogue between the two parties, which has actually improved things dramatically over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. We now understand them and they understand us a little bit better. But on a proposal like this, the planning input is largely around reserving the opportunity for others to invest. So we will obviously be doing things like earmarking bits of land for the health authority should they require it to build their services on. But the ultimate decision as to when they invest and to what level they invest still sits with that organisation. You know, it's not for the planning authority to tell the health authority, you now need to build a doctor's surgery, or you now need to do this, or you now need to do that. Our part of that equation is to provide the opportunity for that person to invest. So there is often a delay. It's like all of these major sort of service providers. You don't build schools, you don't build doctor surgeries, you don't build whatever service it is until it's cost effective to do so and you've got plenty of people to use it. So that inevitably means that there's always, well, typically a lag. You don't build a school and leave it standing empty. You don't build a doctor's surgery and leave it standing empty. The other part of the equation is the planning department's role is about the infrastructure. It's about land and buildings. It's not about doctors. So again, we can provide the opportunity for the health authority to invest, but what we can't do is, force them to employ doctors and nurses to deliver the services which are required. That is not our role. Our role is to enable others to provide. So yeah, it would be wrong to say to anybody at this stage, there'll be a doctor's surgery open in the first year of development on this site and everything will be okay. I'm sure it will be very difficult. And, as I say, we shouldn't underestimate the challenge ahead to deliver this thing. Nigel's point at the end that he made, translating that vision that I think we've all got into a workable proposition is going to require a lot of hard graft between now and the development actually taking place.
Right. Councillor Fredericks.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mark. I mean, there's a mind-boggling amount of work that's been gone into this, and I just congratulate you. Of course, I'm going to bang on about affordable housing. I think that's 15% is too low a starting point. It really isn't. We've got developments going on with 35% affordable housing on it. So I actually protest that. I think that should be maybe an end point with an uplift, because that is just too low as a starting point, as particularly when you're looking at that large developments. We need affordable housing. We need that more than market housing. So in my mind, it actually should be turned on its head. Now, is there any room that we can actually start at a decent figure of maybe 20-25%, and then maybe look at the viability? Because I just think 15% is just, well, it sticks in my craw, as you can imagine. Thank you.
So I'm very sympathetic to obviously the basic argument that you're making there, that the strategy ought to be maximising the delivery of affordable housing, and we need to push as hard as we possibly can on it. The dilemma that we face is it's not just a figure based on need, it's a figure which has to be viable and stand a reasonable prospect of actually happening on the ground. And the basic problem is finished development values in areas like North Walsham are much lower than finished development values in areas like Wells or Holt and Cromer. And that has a direct impact on scheme viability, which in turn has a direct impact on the quantity of affordable housing you can ask a developer to provide. If we push the figure higher, say we went for 20 or 25%, we'd run a major risk that the plan would be found unsound because the proposals were not deliverable. And that would not just compromise affordable housing delivery at North Walsham, it would compromise delivery of the plan across the entirety of the district. I don't think there's an answer. I don't think there's an answer to your challenge. I think we've got to set the affordable housing requirement at a figure which is viable to deliver. And unfortunately, the evidence says in North Walsham, that figure is about 15%. And if we go any higher, as I say, we just run the risk that the plan will be found unsound.
I know. I hear you. I hear you, as much as it's uncomfortable for me to hear you. But I think that 15% should then be set in stone. It shouldn't be, oh, they can barter us down. And there should be an uplift clause in there. that says, because that's what we did on the Norwich Road development, didn't we? To counteract the low number of affordable housing, there should be an uplift clause in that. And the second point is, because I'm a Munsleyite, travelling to North Horsham is actually, it's very hit and miss on the transport, and also travelling to Norwich as well. So I understand that we want to make this more of a green agenda, but the reality is that from Munsley, you have to go into North Horsham and then out again on the train, but the bus doesn't stop at the train station. There is room that we could actually put a lay-by in there for transport to get to Norwich. But I think that puts a lot of people off actually using their cars when they have to go to Norwich. The transport isn't joined up. Sorry, it's not tap dancing. It's my dog on the lino that's making the noise. So, we want to make this greener, but we still haven't joined up that little bit yet by making that the public transport more viable for people. I don't know if you've got any comments on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, the transport planning, that business about sort of joining up, having a transport hub, making sure if you arrive at, somewhere and you get off of a bus and there's a train link to wherever you want to go to, I think is absolutely critical to the success of this. Simple things, if you go on your bike and you arrive and there's nowhere secure to keep your bike, you don't want to be stood on a rail platform in the rain because it hasn't got a cover on it. Making that shift away from people getting into their cars and using an alternative method has got to be one of the key things that we build into this. Otherwise, I think if you said, I think Nigel made similar points, it just won't work. It's got to be planned in at the outset. I don't think I can say much more than that, Wendy.
Right, I want to try to bring this to a conclusion so that we can go to a vote. Are there any final queries or comments or questions that members want to raise?
We've got Councillor Heinrich.
Councillor Heinrich.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not on the North Horsham West, but it's on the Norwich Road development, if I can move to that. Is that okay, Chair?
Sorry.
I want to refer to the Norwich Road development rather than North Horsham West. Is it an appropriate point to do it, or is Mark going to cover that at one after?
I think Mark's going to respond just on that.
Mark wants to respond to that, Paul.
Yeah, so sorry, chap. I think what might be best to do, we cover these recommendations sequentially. So the first recommendation is about North Walsham West, the consultation engagement responses, and it simply asks you to note the results of the public engagement and the emerging principles of the development brief. That's just to note it. And the only second bit of the recommendation is you give delegated authority to proceed with the development brief work. So if we covered that recommendation first and got that report out of the way, and then take the content of the policies secondary, because I want to say a little bit more about the policies anyway. So I'm just referring to the North Walsham West consultation engagement report, and take that recommendation first on page 39.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for clarifying that, Mark. So what we're being asked to consider is a recommendation to note the results of the public engagement on the emerging principles in the development brief. That's recommendation number 1. The second recommendation is that delegated authority to be given to the planning policy manager to progress with the development brief following the Regulation 19 consultation. So we've got sort of a two-stage process in effect. What we're not wanting to do is to delay the submission of the plan to Regulation 19, notwithstanding that the development brief, it's possible that it may be ready by then, but probably not. We don't want to hold up the progress of the plan, because we definitely do want to go to examination by September next year, if we possibly can. So I'm going to, in the light of those two recommendations, I'm going to ask for a proposer. Councillor Heinrich proposing, and a seconder. Councillor Kershaw, thank you very much. So if all those in favour, if you can raise your hand, please.
Looks to be unanimous.
I was just going to say, Matt, I think that looks as if it's unanimous, doesn't it? Right, okay, thank you very much to everyone. So moving to the next item, which I think it will be item 8. Mark, am I correct on that? Local plan,
Yeah.
allocations, and it's over to you again.
Okay. Sorry, Chair, that was a bit messy because we started discussing the sort of policy for North Walsham when we were debating the brief for North Walsham. The two things were sort of taken together in a way. So yeah. So this item really about trying to agree, although I'm not going to take you through each individual policy, the final policy wordings for each of the site allocations in the plan. So I'll just explain sort of the plan overall and where we are on that. So the local plan is going to have 2 lots of policies in it. I'm going to call the first lot sort of general development management policies or general policies. They're things like, protecting the AONB, providing car parking, biodiversity gain, all those sort of things you'd expect the majority of development proposals to comply with. You've signed all those off after a long sort of exercise of considering that policy wording over the last sort of year or so. You've agreed a comprehensive set of what I'm describing as general topic-based policies, and they're finally drafted and ready to go. The second part of the plan is the site allocations bit of the plan. So these are the individual allocations which will deliver about half of the required growth. And each of those site allocations is also subject to a separate policy which must be met in order to secure planning permission. So when a developer makes a planning application, they have to comply with the general policies, percentage of affordable housing, housing mix, biodiversity, all those other things, and the specific policies that relate to individual sites. And the appendix, which is in the papers, basically gives you the individual policy wording for the site allocations bit of the plan. And it's basically, you've seen them all before. They're all published at Regulation 18 stage, so they're subject to lots of consultation. You've had papers over the last 8 or 9 months looking at the site allocations and looking at some of these policies. And you'll recall that along the route, and I'll use a few examples, you asked for things to be added. So Wendy in Munsley, you asked for specific reference around protecting the amenity of residents of adjacent properties, and you'll see that additional requirement has gone into the policy wording. At Blakeney, there was reference to off-site pedestrian improvements to provide safe routes to school so people could walk from the proposed allocation to the primary school on a safe route, and that has gone into the policy requirements. We've modified the structure of them, we've simplified them, we've tried to use common language throughout so they all look like they're authored by the same person. We've added in additional requirements in relation to protecting wildlife habitats. We specifically mentioned and required the delivery of a set proportion of open space on each of the sites. So the policies don't just say provision of open space, they specify the quantity as a minimum requirement. And on those proposals which are mixed use, so those which are delivering not just housing, but have got, say, elderly provision in them or employment land or something else, there is a specific phasing obligation to address that issue, that development often proceeds in a piecemeal fashion, with developers building the houses first and not building the other things at all or sometime later. So each of the mixed use allocations requires the delivery of comprehensive development in accordance with a phasing obligation. So attached to the papers is a what purports to be the final version of the policy. They're not actually quite final yet. They're still subject to bits and pieces of editing and changing. And I've referenced one particular change to the North Walsham policy around, I think we should expressly refer to the vision for the development. At the moment, the North Walsham policy talks about a development brief, it talks about a design code, but it doesn't actually reference the vision for the development. So I'll make that a specific recommendation that policy should include that. As I say, this lost my thread there. We had a representation which I ought to refer to. So this was the one that the chair referred to earlier on that's been circulated. So concerns expressed about the impact of the Cromer allocation on the Felbrigg to Rowton Road, in particular, the possibility that the Rowton Road will be used for rat running. That was my interpretation of that letter. I'm not going to read it in full because you've seen it, you've got it in front of you. It's quite a lengthy piece of correspondence. Essentially, though, I would say that the scheme has been designed in, the Cromer scheme has been designed in a way to avoid unnecessary rat running on Rowton Road. We're not permitting any direct vehicular access onto the Rowton Road at all. The Highway Authority's position throughout has always been that development on that side of the town should avoid access out onto the Rowton Road, precisely because of the concerns about the impact on the network. So the scheme has been designed to avoid that happening, only includes access out onto the Norwich Road. The representations that have been made can be made through the Regulation 19 consultation. So I think that would be the first port of call. You know, if there are remaining concerns of this nature, then people can express those concerns through the upcoming consultation exercise. I was going to risk sharing a policy on a screen and going through it line by line and saying what we've done, but I don't think that would be a very fruitful exercise. You've got the papers in front of you. I'm basically asking you to sign that collection of policies off, but continue to give themselves delegated powers to make further minor modifications. So this is your opportunity as a local member, a local representative, to say, I can see a gap there, there's something you've missed, I'd like you to add X, Y, and Z. And provided those are obviously reasonable requests, we can add those things in at this stage. But I hope and think we've done a pretty comprehensive job of preparing a fairly solid set of policies there for each of the sites. So I'm going to stop and take any questions.
Thank you, Mark, for that presentation. I don't have personally any concerns about the policies as stated in the papers, but I throw it at this point open to members who may have. This is your opportunity to ask questions of Mark.
We've got Councillor Dixon, Councillor Heinrich, Councillor Toy and Councillor Fisher in that order.
Right, okay. Councillor Dixon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question relates to general policy, and I may have missed it, so I apologise if I have, but my concern is around the long-term maintenance and habitat maintenance considerations. I'm very mindful that all the obligations that are coming along, and rightly so, regarding open space, habitat creation, biodiversity, all of those things have a significant impact on the maintenance of the sites overall in the long term. And my question really relates to whether our policy, which I think by default is that as sites have been developed out, they are developed on the basis that we as a local authority will adopt those and take those on as long-term maintenance requirements for the long term. So, but I'm also mindful that there are other options regarding developer, residents management associations, which can work equally as well. So I just want to know where we stand in policy terms for the future regarding particularly those sites which will have a very large and quite costly element in terms of the maintenance of the landscape and habitat and biodiversity requirements.
Okay, so two sets of policies are going to be applicable here. There's the site-specific policies that we're talking about, and then there's a general open space and habitat policy in the plan itself, which I don't have in front of me. The point you make is an important one. I think if it's not already there, the inclusion of the word maintenance is an important addition to the policy. I'm pretty sure it will be there, Nigel. But what we would do is we would require the approval of a scheme of maintenance. We wouldn't require the local authority to adopt. So it would leave that flexibility in the policy, the land use policy, to allow for alternative mechanisms for long-term maintenance in the future. You're quite right. You know, I mean, a lot of councils are moving away from adopting public open spaces because of the long-term costs and liability associated with it, and other models are emerging, which we've previously discussed. The local plan would not narrow down or specify a particular maintenance route. It would just require the approval of a maintenance agreement for open space and other types of space which require looking after. I think that's your point. I think it answers your point that you want the ability of alternative mechanisms of maintaining these spaces to be incorporated in the policy rather than obligating the council to go down the route of public adoption, which may be something that will need revisiting over time.
Yes, you've answered my substantive point really, but I would just follow up with, so when would you expect that decision to be made in the process of bringing sites forward? When would that policy choice be made?
It may even be post-decision, Nigel. The way it would work is you would impose a condition on a planning application requiring the delivery of said open space or habitat created space or biodiversity gain. A condition or even an obligation in a Section 106 agreement would require those details of ongoing maintenance to be agreed. So I don't even think it would be necessary for the determination of the planning application to predetermine that, provided there was a condition which said prior to a given point in time, a scheme for the ongoing maintenance of said space will be agreed. That would be something that could even happen post-planning approval. If developers have got an option they want to submit and it can be considered through the planning application stage, it could be considered there as well. But it's typically an issue which is dealt with via a condition or a legal agreement, quite often post-decision.
Okay, I can see why you can, you know, I see why you say it can be post-decision. I just have a feeling that that's the kind of thing that I personally would like to see in place at the decision stage, so that many of the things that happen during the course of developing a site, you can draw assurances that is going to happen. And I've seen too many examples of where a developer, I think, sells the site short in terms of the long-term maintenance considerations, and that undoubtedly has a cost further down the line. And I think the more we can encourage developers more we can encourage decisions like that, which are quite major in terms of, you know, that's the long term. Bringing a site forward and building it is relatively short term. It's how it looks in 25 years time, 50 years time, and so on, that and does it deliver on that green agenda, the biodiversity and habitat requirements that we're looking for. And so I would have some concern if we were prepared to leave that as a matter of routine to post decision. I think that there are substantial advantages in having that sorted at the decision point. Yeah.
Okay. Point well made. it is a concern that developers do set up management companies to manage their open spaces and grounds maintenance, and that the charges that they charge on an annual basis to residents can be quite substantial. I know that's a concern nationally, as it were, which I think is ongoing as to how that's going to be regulated, if at all, through legislation. Who was next, Matt? Sorry, I didn't get all of the list.
We've got Paul Heinrich next. But
Mr. Chairman,
Nigel?
just before you move on, could I just ask Mark if he would respond to that before we move on?
Yeah, so I notice Ian's put a note in the group chat. I don't know whether everybody can see it, that this issue is covered in policy HC2, which is one of the generic policies in the plan. I was going to suggest this isn't site specific, Nigel, so it's not related to the signing off of the individual site allocations. It's about the generic policy for the provision of these types of spaces. I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going to take it offline, and I'm going to say I'll come back to you specifically once I've looked at what that policy says and to see whether it's got the sort of assurance in it that you're looking for. I mean, it obviously raises a problem if it hasn't. What are we going to do about it? But it's not related to the site allocation policies themselves, so I'd rather take it offline if we can.
Okay, that's fine, Mr. Chairman. All I would ask is that perhaps the minutes could just reflect that, so that we can just check that off at a later point, please.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, Councillor Dixon. Thank you. Yeah, we can do that, I'm sure. Councillor Heinrich?
Thank you, Chairman. It's specific to North Walsham NW01/B Norwich Road Nursery Drive, Mark. First, just a point of correction. Under point 3 of your site requirements, you mentioned 2 existing businesses on the site. There's at least 6, 7 if you count the fact the cafe has 2 incarnations depending on time of day. So I think you need to be a bit clearer on that.
Yep.
The second is regarding this landscape buffer. You'll be aware that there's a certain level of local concern given the number of mature trees and the naturally rewilded land on the remaining part of the old Le Grais nursery. We've very simply put a tree preservation on the whole site, but you mentioned just a 6-metre buffer, whereas that whole area should possibly be included as part of the major landscaping, if possible. Now, given we're likely to get an application on this site in the new year, even before possibly the completion of the Reg 19 consultation, having absolute clarity on what we want on that in regards to that, I think is absolutely critical.
Yeah, okay. So I think you're referring to 2 separate things there. The 6-metre buffer, my understanding of that is a buffer planting strip between the Norwich properties and the development site. So you recall there's a parcel of land in behind the garden centre, which is included in the allocation. And local residents there have been anxious to ensure no adverse impact, basically overlooking an amenity concerns. And Stuart had previously agreed, and we agreed at a previous meeting, to put a 6-metre landscaping buffer in along that boundary. I have seen cited some latest development proposals for that area, which has largely got 1-storey buildings on there as well. And I think as a response to the public consultation exercise, which the developer held locally, they've modified their scheme, I think largely to address those local concerns. The other wider parcel of landscaping that you're referring to, which is more towards the centre of the site, where there's a fairly sort of biodiverse, sort of rich area of existing planting that needs to be retained. Again, I've seen a modified plan. I don't think it's been widely circulated yet, which retains the entirety of that area, or the majority of that area, into the scheme's sort of central landscaping space, making best use of what's there. So I think, again, that would be an issue that by the time a planning application is formally submitted, will be resolved. The point you make, though, had we not been dealing with the developer directly, the policy requirements ought to probably reflect that. So probably a little tweak to the policy that refers to the retention of that specific space, would be a worthwhile modification, and I'm happy to make that recommendation and add that in. That's fine.
Thank you. Just one other point is I'll come back to affordable housing again. I presume we will be requiring 15% minimum on it.
That's what the policy will require.
Given the past history of this developer, of course, we need to be fairly specific on what we require. I'm sure you'll put that in there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Was it Councillor John Toy next, Matt?
Yeah, and then Peter Fisher.
Councillor Toy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, firstly, whilst I accept we've agreed that it's not part of this, I fully endorse what Councillor Dixon was saying. Something like I mentioned before I even took the portfolio, talking to people, how we, as we develop green spaces, how's it going to be managed and maintained? So I'm pleased to see that we're moving that forward. And actually, I would like to share in that information to see where we land, because I think as people become more connected with where they live, as hopefully we make these spaces where they live closely, they may be want to be more involved, and it has been evidenced around the country. They may want to be more involved with maintaining their own space. So it needs to be a policy that says it will be looked after in the long term, but we need to be open in the ways that's done. So I'll leave that there, because that as we've said, it's not part of today's debate. The other thing I thought I should just fill in, because on the email that came around to you about the Felbridge Road, it mentioned I'd been down there. Essentially, the issues have been similar to Houghton. It's the effect of something going on somewhere affecting somewhere else. I have pointed out to them the policies that we've been discussing this morning that are down with the specific sites, so they're aware of that. They're aware that it's a highways issue. But they just wanted to reinforce that point, as we have done with North Walsham this morning. So it is nothing beyond that at the moment, and just acknowledge that there is concerns there, but that we do have policies to do on it. So that was all I wanted to add. So there's no real questions there. Just a couple of points I thought I'd put in. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, John. Peter Fisher, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just a question for Mark on the Holcombe Road Wells site. Probably my bad memory, but I thought there were 60 houses allocated to that site. I see we've got 50 on the sheet. That was my only question.
Yeah, so as part of the process of reviewing these policies, we revisited all of the numbers when we published the plan at Regulation 18 stage, we put a given number of dwellings against each site, which was calculated on the basis of a fairly sort of broad brush sort of density assumption that each of the sites would deliver somewhere between 30 and 40 to the hectare, which is roughly what a housing development delivers. We've subsequently looked at each individual site, and we've removed from the developable area things like open space, because clearly we don't want people building houses on open space. And that's had a consequence of the housing numbers being reduced slightly on a great many of the allocations, actually, not hugely, but just to ensure that the right sort of priority is given to open space, and we're not too ambitious on the numbers and find out that actually the sites can't accommodate the numbers that we put on in the plan. Now, I will say as well that elsewhere in the document, it makes absolutely clear that the numbers of dwellings on each individual site will be determined through the planning application and not through the local plan, because it is only at that stage that you will see the size of the dwellings, the size of the garden areas, the impact on neighbours and so on. So the notion that we're in a position now to determine precisely how many houses will go on each site is clearly wrong. So it says in the document in black and white, numbers are expressed as approximate numbers, and the determination in relation to how many dwellings will be accommodated on each site will be a matter for the planning application to determine. But the only reason we've put numbers on there at all is we've got to basically say to the inspector, we've allocated sufficient land to meet the housing target. So we need an understanding ourselves of broadly what can be accommodated across the entirety of all of the allocations. So you basically got to work out an average number. So that's a long-winded answer to your very simple question. The number will have been reduced because we would have calculated the open space requirements and deducted that from the site, looked at what's left, and then applied a formula, and that would have come up with a new number, which is expressed as an approximate rather than a definitive amount.
Thank you, Mark. Does that satisfy your query, Peter?
Absolutely, thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you very much. So final sweep before we move to a vote on this on these recommendations. Any
Councillor Victoria Holiday.
Councillor Victoria, yeah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just questioning the Blakeney affordable house percentage. Is that only 15? Because I know there's an acute need for affordables everywhere, but Blakeney is probably one of the top.
Yeah. It'll be 35 or 40% in Blakeney, Victoria. So we've commissioned an update to the viability assessment, which is one of the remaining pieces of work to be done. But it's always been the case in areas like Blakeney and Wells, the high value bits of the district, that we can deliver about 35 or 40% affordable. So it certainly will not be as low as 15%.
Thank you, that's brilliant.
Excellent. That's reassuring to hear you say that, Mark. If only everywhere were the same. Right.
We've got Councillor Adams and Councillor Toy.
Councillor Adams.
Oh, hello. Yes, thank you. I obviously Councillor Pearce isn't on the call, but I believe the question he probably would have asked at this point would be whether a specific policy was required on access onto the B1436 from the Norwich Road site. So I think his concern was probably more around the impacts on Car Lane, the B1436 junction there to Old Mill Road. So I'm just wondering, has that been considered? Obviously, John and yourself, Mark, have addressed it a couple of times already, but I think that's probably what he would have asked today. Thank you.
Okay. And who else have we got, Matt?
Just Councillor Toy.
John, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just going to. It was just a viability thing. It's just as a general thing. The larger the development, the less affordable housing we get, which is not necessarily where we'd like it to be. If we think back to Fakenham, which probably started off with a policy of 35%, we ended up with 15 there, which I voted against. I didn't feel it was enough. But over time, by getting funding for the roundabout, we got it up to 17.5. So, we have to find other ways to change that viability. But those viabilities are double checked because we do our own for those larger developments. So we don't just take the applicant's viability. But it's an unfortunate fact that the larger the development, that because of the price of the houses then falls, there's less money in it to do affordable housing. And it's a real conundrum, which we have to work at other ways of finding funding to make it, to change the viability. So I thought I would just add that in there, really. It is frustrating, Wendy. We do work at it. We have to look for other ways of funding so that basically the developer's paying less and they can put more into the affordable housing. And I stand by you by challenging it. But I just thought I'd add that because it's come up a few times.
Yeah. Okay. Any comments on that, Mark, that you want to add?
Not in relation to what Councillor Toy's just. So I'm just going to come back on the Cromer site. Councillor Adams made that point. Is there a specific policy requirement about off-site highway works? What I think I'll do, in light of that representation that's been received, given the scale of development, we're talking about 400 houses on that site, it would be an absolute minimum requirement for the developer to do a full traffic impact assessment, look at the impact on adjacent road network, mitigate the impact and so on. There is absolutely no harm, and I can add some wording into the policy which refers to the need to fully address off-site highway impacts. And I think the local residents that made that representation would welcome that addition. As I say, it would be a standard requirement anyway, but I've got no problems with that, adding that into the policy.
Yeah, Okay, thank you for that. So I guess what we're saying is that subject to the tweaks that have been discussed this morning, to include reference to the vision in the North Walsham allocation, for example, that we can take the two recommendations forward to a vote. Recommendation one is that the working party agree revised site allocation policies for Regulation 19 public consultation, and the second recommendation is to delegate minor amendments, such as we've discussed today, in the finalisation of the proposed submission version of the plan to the planning policy manager and the team leader. Can I ask for a proposer for those recommendations? Councillor Grove-Jones, and a seconder, please. Councillor Paul Heinrich. All those in favour, if you could show your hands. Does that appear?
Looks to be unanimous again.
Unanimous, Matt. Thank you. Thank you very much, members. And we're at 11:30, so we're making reasonably good progress, I think. So to item 10, the draft local plan, pre-submission version, and consultation, communications and engagement plan. I believe it's Mark again.
So I'm not going to read through the papers. You've got a sort of comprehensive report there which lays out what we intend to do, and I've said a lot of what I want to say anyway. So we're now, as a consequence of those two previous decisions, you've signed off the entirety of the content of the plan. So you've agreed all the strategic policies, you've agreed the site allocation policy. We are now in a position we can move to the Regulation 19 consultation stage. I think there's an anxiety or an expectation we get that done early in the new year. We've been talking about a date of somewhere around about the 10th of January. Before that can proceed, we need the updated viability assessment and the final version of habitat regulation assessment, which is a legal requirement on the plan. So assuming we get both of those things resolved before Christmas, the officers are working on a timetable that says, let's start the Regulation 19 consultation on the 10th of January. The report basically outlines what we'll do. It's now pretty sort of standard sort of approaches here. We're at a stage where this consultation exercise is covered in the regulations. The regulations tell you what you've got to do, for how long you've got to do it, and who you've got to do it with. You'll see in the report, there's a sort of table there which summarises all the key stages of the things that we will do. So there'll be a member briefing session, probably sometime just before or just after Christmas. So those who don't come to the working party regularly know we're about to launch the consultation, an opportunity to ask sort of questions of officers about what's about to happen. We will consult with everybody on a huge database that we've got. So anybody that's previously been involved in the plan in any way at all, written in representations, parish councils, site promoters and developers and so on, will all get direct notification. It's a formal process that you have to notify them. The consultation is basically it's a web-based consultation with a consultation portal, and there is a specified form which the inspectorate encourage, although they don't require you to use it. They encourage you to use a form for making representations. The big difference this time round is those who make comments are making comments against a number of legal tests. So previously, if you recall at Regulation 18, people could write in and say whatever they wanted to, almost in any format that they wanted to. And then we had the headache of sorting out all the representations, or organising them and making sense of what had been said. The way that it happens this time is prescribed. So people basically have to say, I don't think your plan is sound, and I don't think it's sound for the following reasons. And this is what you've got to do in order to make it sound, so that the inspector can sit down and see what's been said, why it's been said, and how the plan needs to be modified. So it's quite a sort of structured, sort of tailored sort of approach to the consultation. We'll obviously provide assistance, we'll provide, notes and guidance, and we'll be available to take people's questions about how they go through the process. The only error I've spotted in the report is I think the report refers to an 8-week consultation period, when actually it's a 6-week consultation period, not 8 weeks. We'll do some publicity, so there'll be a lot of coverage in the newspaper. We'll do sort of social media, all that stuff that I've got no understanding of, but we'll make sure it's available through various social media sort of channels, so it gets a high profile. And we'll do lots of work with sort of town and parish councils, so they all know and are aware of what's going on and are supported through the process. So I think really I'm just asking you to endorse that as a way forward. Some of you will be aware that because of the timings of this sort of committee cycles, that report's already been to Cabinet and has been agreed by Cabinet as a way forward. But I think it's important that you also make the decision, or at least confirm that you're happy to proceed on that basis. So I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, I was just going to make that point, that we're sort of doing things in slightly reverse order here, in that this came to the Cabinet, open Cabinet meeting on the 29th of November, and Cabinet has approved the process set out in the report here, subject to the working party confirming that they're happy with it today. So that will enable the team to move forward to launching on the 10th of January or thereabouts. And we've, as it were, accelerated it, which is useful in view of the downtime that we will have over the Christmas period. Just one thing I want to flag up. We do actually have a public consultation ongoing at the moment in part of our district. It's actually almost exclusively in the ward that I represent, for conservation area appraisals. So there's going to be a slight overlap, because that's due to finish, I think, at the end of January. So we just, I think, need to be aware of the fact that we're putting out 2 lots of public consultations at the same time. And we just need to make sure that the public are aware of that, and that the two are not confused, as it were. But having said all of that, any questions or comments from any members at this stage?
See any hands raised?
No, that's reassuring. Good. So what I propose to do then, without further ado, is just read out the recommendation on page 61. Recommendation 1, that the working party agree the communications and engagement plan as the basis for conducting regulation 19 public consultation on the draft local plan and supporting documents with consultation commencing on the 10th of January. That's still a definite date in your mind, is it, Mark?
Well, I think, Chair, you said there or thereabouts, which was a very useful qualification, because as of today, we don't have the viability assessment and we don't have the final habitat regulation assessment. I would hope there's no delays in that, but we've done some sort of pre-publicity. We've been saying we're aiming for the 10th, but we've not absolutely definitively said it will be the 10th. And formal notices don't need to go out until after the Christmas period. So I'd just like to reserve that slight degree of flexibility. I'm not talking about, delaying it for weeks or months or anything, but I'd like to, I like the words there or thereabouts would be very, very useful.
Well, should we add at the end of that recommendation after January or as soon as possible thereafter?
That would be very, very helpful if you're happy to go for that. Yeah.
Are members happy just to add that slight qualification, and then it just covers the possibility of any slippage? And I think that's important with Christmas in the way that we do that. And so recommendation 2 is that the working party delegate any further minor changes to the plan arising from the habitat regulation and viability assessments to the planning policy manager in consultation with the chair of the working party. So that's just covering what Mark has referred to, that we're not quite ready yet because we haven't got the viability and the habitat regulation information to a conclusion as we are as of today. So what I'm going to ask for is a proposer with that slight amendment to recommendation 1. Councillor John Toy proposing, and a seconder, please. Sorry, I'm just going across my screens. Councillor Fredericks.
Yeah.
Sorry, Councillor Fredericks. Yes, Councillor Fredericks to second. So all those in favour, would you please raise a hand?
Okay, yeah, that's unanimous.
Yes, there's a definite pattern here, Matt. Unanimity is the name of the game this morning, which is very pleasing. Right, thank you very much, members, for that. And you're good to go, Mark. Full speed ahead.
Thank you.
Please say on that. Right, so I think we move now to the remaining items on the agenda, which is just agenda item 11. We have no press and public, I don't think. And item 12, Councillor Toy. John, are you?
Sorry,
muted.
John, you're
Are you on
muted.
mute?
Yeah.
Sorry, again, sorry, Mr. Chairman, for I was trying to catch you before we moved on to those final bits. I just want to say thank you to the team and the work they've done to put us in this position, this place here. You know, we've seen things gone through unanimous this morning. They've obviously worked hard to develop this plan and these policies that you know, there's a few minor tweaks that we've spoken about this morning, but this is really good, solid work that's gone on. And I just wanted to thank the team, considering the you know, the workloads, the period we've worked through, and everything that's gone on. So my thanks to them, and I hope you can all support me in those thanks. Thank you.
Councillor Grove-Jones.
Yes, and I want to also say thank you so much to Mark and the team. I mean, having seen this through from the first early stages and seen the way it's developed, and all the you've taken on board all the parts that we've brought up and queried, and I think it's an excellent piece of work, Mark, and please pass on our congratulations to all the other members of the team, and may it continue in such a good way.
Well, thank you for all that. I mean, I was going to say after the meeting that it's a two-way process. I was going to say thank you to the members, but I'll say it now because I've got the opportunity. It is a collective exercise. It's not just the officers. You know, the input that we get from members clearly improves the policies. The challenge and the scrutiny is really important. So I just wanted to recognise that it's not just about the officer team. You know, a lot of you on the screen give up a lot of your time, invest a lot of energy, and you are that sort of conduit between us and the public. And I know you get an awful lot of grief, and we're not there yet, and we're still going to get lots of problems, I'm sure. But it does feel to me like we've reached a really important sort of staging post in the process. Nearly bloody killed us, to be honest with you. It has been hard work behind the scenes. You know, we're probably going to have to cancel Christmas to get this thing out of the front door, but you know, we'll crack on and try and stay cheerful and optimistic. But yeah, it does. When I look at it, it feels like a good plan. You know, there's a lot of work in there. You know, 4 or 5 years of fairly hard graft, but it feels to me like it's a plan which will hold us in good stead, at least for a few years, until we have to start a review and come up with something else. So anyway, thank you for that. I mean, it's as I say, it's a collective exercise. It's not just about the officers.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. And obviously I echo those sentiments. I think it's an exercise that has been very well undertaken, and a lot of hard work by the officers on the team. And I think it's a credit to you that you have delivered such viable and attractive plan. And I think we can have every confidence that it will be acceptable to the inspector, which is obviously vital for the viability of and the working of the plan moving forward. So thank you for that. So item 11, I'll just reiterate item 11, no press or public to exclude. And item 12, with no exempt matters under item 12 to consider. So thank you very much for your time, everybody. At 11:45, I propose to close the meeting, and we will reconvene in the new year. So thank you for all your efforts during 2021, and we will see one another in 2022 at the next working party. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.